No mai haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups.
Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Welcome back to Cult Chat. I'm Liz Gregory, and I'll be your host today. Now, we've got some special guests I want to introduce you to, and because they've got lots to say, we're not going to have a wee chit-chat with Kaz and Lindy, our other popular co-hosts. However, we are just going to take you back a couple of episodes. Do you remember the interviews that Lindy did with Shane and Rachel? Now, they were from the Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. They were making comment on the Jehovah's Witnesses' bid to be removed from the Royal Commission of Inquiry into abuse in state care and faith-based institutions. Well, we have an update on that. Their bid to be removed from those proceedings has failed. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses will be in the final report due next year, along with Gloriavale. And it reminds me of last week's episode, which was episode 15, called Organisations Under Threat. And in many ways, I hope you could see the parallel of how a group like the Jehovah's Witnesses were following some reasonably standard paths of what organisations do when they come under a bit of scrutiny. The Jehovah's Witnesses were trying to claim that they are not involved in faith-based care. They don't have schools, etc. But they were trying to suggest that their relationships were sort of purely pastoral. However, the Royal Commission, or the court, actually found that they do fall within the scope of the inquiry, and they will be remaining. So make sure you head back to episode 15, Organisations Under Threat, have a listen. And today, when you listen to our new guests, Hopeful and Victory Disciple, reflect on that episode around what happens in Gloriavale and what has been happening and what is currently unfolding, and how Gloriavale are reacting when the pressure and the scrutiny comes on them. We understand Gloriavale will also be in the Royal Commission of Inquiry's final report in one way or another. So today we're going to introduce you to Hopeful and Victory Disciple. They left Gloriavale a couple of years ago, and we've had a lot to do with them, a lot of discussions for our talks over Zoom calls, and just getting to know them better and assisting them in some of their thinking patterns, and them assisting us greatly in understanding what it's like to grow up in a cult. And so today we launched the first of a 4-part series called Kids and Cults. So our next 2 episodes will be Hopeful and Victory and their story and their experiences of living in and growing up in Gloriavale. The 3rd episode will be a dissection from Lindy, Kaz and myself of the content and things that really struck us. And then we'll be looking at the 4th episode about safeguarding children. What is it that we can do and all organisations can do to ensure that children are safe? So come with us as we meet this fantastic couple.
Hi, Victory and Hopeful. It's lovely to have you here. Hello. Always
Hello.
nice. Always great to touch base with you. We have this habit of really long discussions, but I'm setting my eye on the time, and we're going to try and do this really narrow focused condensation of some concepts tonight. But yeah, look, I'm really thrilled that you're here with us, and I want to welcome our listeners to the program tonight. And I expect really that maybe there might be some moments where we have our tissue boxes ready, because obviously content matter around some of this is deeply personal. So I thought before we get to that phase, you guys heard like a bit of a crazy lead up to this interview. What on earth has been going on in your household?
Well, we lost power on Saturday afternoon, about mid-afternoon, and it only just came on this afternoon at about 4 o'clock this afternoon.
And that's Monday. So I
Yeah.
just want to ask about the meat in your freezer and all those really practical things.
The freezer didn't do too bad.
Right.
The meat is all pretty solid still, because we've got a big meat freezer that pretty much holds pretty well. The washing backed up a fair bit.
Oh, yes.
It's probably the main side effect.
Of course, you've got 7 children, and so how on earth do you keep people occupied for that number of days without power? Tell us how you do it.
The first on Sunday, we decided to stay home, do church at home, and we ended up cooking marshmallows on the fireplace and just having kind of a indoor camping day.
Yeah. So I've cooked all the meals on the open, it's not an open fire, but we open the door and just cook all the meals in the fire.
Yeah, so just put a pan into the wood burner to cook the meals.
I love that. Yeah, that just says to me.
Yeah, it keeps the hot water up too. So yeah.
Yep. And I love it. Just that creativity. Okay, bad situation. Let's do something family together, which I think is really, really, really special. And so I guess looking ahead to where we might head for the next sort of 40 or 50 minutes, there'll be lots of opportunities to talk about those kind of memories that can get made in childhood with your families. And I want to ask both of you some questions around what it was like being a child in Gloriavale. And I guess what we'll find is some stories that you will bring in from your experiences now, having left, looking back. But I do want to see if we can reach back into some of those moments and what you were thinking at the time as a child, because that's always a really interesting thing to reflect on. Inviting again our listeners, we're not just on a podcast, but we're actually on YouTube now as well. And so we've got visuals here of Victory and Hopeful. So we're having this conversation over Zoom, but I can see them and they can see me. Now, sometimes that means it's really easy to talk over people because you can see, you get right into this discussion, but I'm aware for our audio listeners that we're going to try and be, well, I am far more well-behaved than our normal conversations. And we do enjoy talking together. So I guess I'd like to start. I think it would make sense to start with a reasonably brief sort of overview, just the main sort of hit points of you, families that you've come from, numbers of children, marriage together, how you spent maybe your jobs, time in Gloriavale, and then you're heading out. So I expect that will take a few minutes, but that will help us to understand some of the journey you've been on, and then we can head back in and look a bit more at your views of childhood. So who's the oldest? Oh, Victory. would you like to start and just give us that brief interview? And you can jump in with each other's story. That's fine. We'd love to get to know you a little bit better.
So I actually was born in the Springbank community, and I think I was around 3 when our family was one of the first ones that shifted over to the Gloriavale house. So that my younger years were in the Gloriavale house setting with a few other families. My mother later became the grade 1 teacher, and my grandmother became the grade 2 teacher. So they were my teachers when I was in school. So that was kind of my world as far as growing up goes. I'd always spend my spare time in the classroom with my mum. if I wasn't working on the team. So when I left school, I started helping my mum in the classroom, and within a year I was pretty much the full morning in the classroom. So that was when I was 15, and then I went on to become a teacher, got my training, and was there until we left. So I had got married when I was 20. I had all my babies with me in the classroom. I didn't actually have them and give birth to them in the classroom, but that's probably the only thing I didn't do in the classroom with them.
How many of these babies? How many babies are we talking here?
So I had 6 when we left, and had my last one not long after we left.
And so you left in
2021 in August, and I had my baby about 8 weeks later. So, yeah, that was kind of my life in a nutshell.
And you were one of how many in your family?
There were 8. I was the second to youngest.
Yeah.
So I guess the biggest passion in my life has been kids. I lived and breathed kids my whole life, with my mum being a school teacher and then me becoming one. So that was my only purpose for living life in Gloriavale.
Interesting. And your mum, she was related to the founder?
She was the founder's daughter.
And what number was she in her family?
I'm pretty sure she was 3.
Third?
Yeah, I think she was 3rd.
Yeah, out of, was it 16?
16
in his original family, yes. Okay. Thank you. Hopeful.
So I was also born over on the East Coast at Springbank property. My earliest memories was when we're still at the Springbank property. Our family was one of the last of 3 families to move over to Gloriavale. And so my sort of 3, 4, 5-year-old memories was a very small group of people living at Springbank, very happy, very settled, knew everybody. At around 5.5, we moved to Gloriavale, and that was when my life got very, very messy. And we can delve into that later. But so I went to the farm when I left school, went to the dairy farm, spent a few years on the dairy farm, and got married at 18. And then about 8 years after we were married, or 7 years after we got married in 2016, I got told that I was becoming a teacher and went into the school and was there in the school helping Victory till we left in 2021. I had my father was a sort of very, very caring, special person, quite unique in Gloriavale. And so a lot of my childhood was probably more sheltered than a lot of children growing up. So that, in a way, contrasts a lot with Victory's growing up. So it's very interesting noting the similarities and the differences between the 2 families. So
there's a similarity there. Both of you lost a parent. So can you tell me about the sort of ages you were when that happened?
So Victory was 3.
Yeah.
I was almost 3.
3.5.
Oh yeah, 3.5.
So my dad died round about, don't quote me on it, but around 6 months, maybe less, after we moved over to the Gloriavale property.
Okay.
And my father died when I was 15, just before I turned 16.
Yeah. And there haven't been a lot of deaths in Gloriavale, sort of among the adult population, so incredibly tragic, and both were illnesses. and and then you've married each other, so there's a little bit of a shared sort of story there. But were you ever able to explore the impact that had on your lives?
No, well, not until we left, really. There was, I remember the funeral, and it was like I was just dead inside. I was doing. Mum was keeping a journal it was in spring. Mum was keeping a journal of the hours, the time that I left the room to go to dairy in the morning and the time I got back to eat tea at night. And it was averaging around 4 o'clock in the morning leaving and 10 o'clock at night getting back home.
Wow.
And that was for that whole period leading up to my dad dying.
And how old were you, did you say?
15.
15, right.
And then Dad died in the middle of that.
Gosh.
And just not being able to, I went straight to work the same day he died. And it wasn't until a few months before we left, my wife and I went away for a day and 2 nights, like you get in Gloriavale, and we started talking about our dads.
Wow.
And I ended up crying for probably about 6 hours straight. And that was the first time I'd ever been able to grieve, So that was like, how many years later? That's
easily 10.
Nearly 14 years after it happened. And finally just being able to express sorrow and sadness over it.
Yeah, so the delayed grieving process appears to be a common feature of groups like Gloriavale. Can you just explain to us why is that? Why is there this emotional shutdown over death and grief?
Well, I remember someone that I respected quite highly at the time came to me and said, I know it's sad that your dad's dying. This was before my dad had died because he had cancer. And he said, I know it's sad your dad's dying, but, my dad left the church. And that's far worse than what's happening to your dad.
Oh.
And he wasn't saying it spitefully or hurtfully or anything. He was actually trying to help. And yet what that shut me into was just this, no, I can't express sadness about it. I remember the day after the funeral, and there was something that I would have normally gone and told my dad about, and it kind of hit me. And I remember I was in the middle of the lounge room, and all of a sudden I felt that emotion start coming. I just remember this strong shut it down. I ran to the bathroom, shut myself in the bathroom, and just to close it all down, to shut it all down, and until I was able to walk out with a smile on my face.
Wow.
And it has a massive effect. It's like I could never move on from losing my father. You could never kind of go there in your mind of saying, because my dad died, this part of my life was harder, or that part of it. You could never go down that line. You just had to shut it down and say, no, it's for the best. He's in a better place.
Victory, obviously you were much younger, and so your ability to recall, but you will be aware of what was said in the years following about.
Yes. So it was similar but different because our whole family was younger. Like the oldest child was around 13 when my dad died. So we were all still children, I guess you could say. And so even though there was a lot of talking around, you should be happy because your dad's in a better place. My dad kind of became this public figure that the leaders would get up and actually talk about publicly. And I remember every time that happened, our whole family would be just sitting there in tears, and yet kind of feeling bad that we were crying because we should be kind of happy. I don't ever remember getting growled at for crying about my dad dying, but I do remember there being that expectation that you should be happy that your father's in a better place. But then I got a lot of damage in other ways because I was one of the youngest in the family, and the way my dad would get talked about was when I was being naughty or, getting a growl, and it would always come out then, you wouldn't be making daddy happy, or daddy couldn't love you like this. And so I grew up right from, like, I was not even 4 when he died, and I remember thinking that my dad just could not love me if he was alive. So I was glad that he had died and didn't know me, because I thought that he wouldn't love me if I was alive. And so I carried that right up until we left, and I was really torn apart by it, because all my older brothers and sisters and my mum would do that when I was, being a child.
Yes.
So that was probably the most damaging part for me, is that even though there was this strong legacy of honouring him and being faithful to the church for him and living up to what he died for, there was this other concept that he wouldn't even be happy with me anyway. So, it's just really confusing.
Deeply disturbing, distressing, that what you can take on as a child, the things you can tell yourself, because what other people have put in your mind sort of sticks with you. And I think that's something I actually want to talk about and expand on, is this concept of what goes on in your childhood and into your psyche. And I've just finished, it might be time to just bring it out, Mission of Malice, my exodus from Kwazaza Bantu, Erica Bornman. And really it's sort of the most similar group to Gloriavale that I've found, and they live on a Christian mission station in South Africa, and it's just so incredibly similar because their doctrines and beliefs were similar. So their whatever happened after and through it were very similar, and the impacts on people leaving are incredibly similar. And she actually makes a quote and a comment about what happened around the age of 3. And she says, I don't realize it, but I'm sort of at war with myself. And she starts to talk about her spirit's being broken. You have to break a child's spirit by the time it's 3 years old. So there's a lot of stuff that goes in around that age group. She also says, I realized I became a spectator in my own life. Ever since I was a little girl, everyone was deciding things for me. And she talks about the conditioning as a young kid. A lie once told remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the child's truth. And she says that's exactly how their brand of indoctrination and brainwashing work. She said, imagine you're a child and you're told over and over and over again that you amount to nothing. The impact that has on a young child. So can we talk about what are some of the features of the Gloriavale story that linked to, your childhood that have had an impact on you significantly? So whether it's a belief or a doctrine, you've already talked about not being good enough and living up to your father's, what his expectations might have been. What are some of these other things that you're told or believed as a young person that took root inside of you?
So I guess lots of those things didn't even, we couldn't even put them into words as a child. Probably the journey of becoming a parent and then hearing what gets told to you as a parent and how you should treat your children. You agree with it because you can look back to your childhood and see that it got done to you, so maybe I need to do it to my kids. For me, it was even stronger than that, because I believed that I was a bad kid because my mum didn't treat me harshly enough, because that's what someone else in my family would say all the time. about me. Well, you were just spoilt, or you were just bad because mummy let you away with everything. So here I am coming to parenthood and thinking, well, however I was treated, I must need to treat my kids harsher than that, because that's why I was bad, because I wasn't treated harshly enough. And yet, looking back at how harshly I was treated, it makes sense as to why I was behaved the way I was.
Oh, that's incredible. So it's the cycle, and they're trying to blame you for bad behavior, but actually you've got some traumas because of things that have actually happened to you. And forgive me if I just quote again, because Erica Bornman, I think you guys are going to be good friends, I think, and we're going to have Erica hopefully on our show and to talk with us as she shares some of her journey. But she says she went to a therapist, and the therapist said, Erica, do you realize how often you use the word bad when you talk about yourself? I was bad. What I did was bad. This writing is bad. Sorry, it's bad. And she says, wow, I didn't even notice that. But yeah, that's a word I've heard you and other leaders use, that you were bad. How damaging was that to your psyche, carrying that just through your childhood?
I don't even know if I could express how damaging it was. I mean, we're still only just finding out how damaging that was. But there was literally nothing, not one single thing in my life that I could say I was good at or be proud of, or, even these concepts of confidence or competence, you don't ever feel those feelings. You don't ever feel hope that your needs will be met. You don't ever have dreams to look forward to that are your own. It's just, you just live in this state of hoping that you survive enough for someone to maybe like you, to give you something that you need or want. So it's, your whole world is completely reliant on the adults in your life liking you or thinking you're okay, or not annoying them or knocking them off. And that's how you get your needs met as a child.
Right.
So obviously, me thinking that I was a bad child, or actually that I lived a life as a bad child, it meant my needs were less looked after, because I was always more being pushed away or being told no. Because I was bad, I needed my will broken, or these things. So the less you can know or understand how to obey the rules as a child, the more discipline or harsh treatment you get to teach you.
Yes. And so you're coming to a key point, and hope we might want to jump in with this. We may not have spelled it out, and we haven't deliberately. We're going to share that story of Gloriavale and the community and what it looks like through your story. But it probably is useful for us to say that Gloriavale is a live-in community claiming to be Christian. It has, around 550 people there. It's been going for 5 decades, but the main leader did die a few years ago, and now they are facing an onslaught of, media allegations, accusations, court hearings, etc. And so when you're living with people constantly, you're living in these small rooms with your family, there's no peace and quiet here. How's that, Victory?
So I just wanted to contrast with
Please do.
Victory. You talked about what effect did being bad have on you as a child. So for me, it was a bit different. She got to the point where she believed she was bad, whereas me, I developed just a completely false, deceitful, totally false person that I could just play and be. And that I still fight that to this day. That's something that is just so deeply ingrained from growing up through that. There's not a day that goes by that I don't have to actually consciously stop and think, I need to be who I am, no matter what I think that looks like to other people, I'm going to be who I am.
Yep.
Because you grow up hiding what you truly are, because the price of being bad is fatal. It's fatal.
Brilliant. You've used the word fatal, and you just talked about being bad, but being bad is what? Being bad is simply, talking at the dinner table when you shouldn't, or wearing, not wearing gumboots down to the farm. I mean, being bad is hardly what you and I might consider bad. I mean, you had to have your hair combed over the right way. You wouldn't be allowed that big mop you've got now. I mean, tell us about the strictness of the life and what being bad means.
So yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, I was bad if I didn't shave. I grow whiskers quite fast, and if I didn't shave and had stubble, I was bad, sinful, not just bad, but actually sinful, bordering on losing your soul and rebellious. If I let my hair grow too long, it was bad. Things like this.
Having your arms showing.
Yeah, sleeves rolled up, all that sort of stuff. And I think I wanted to elaborate a little bit on something Victory talked about earlier. I've found more insight since we've left, and in looking at our parenting towards our children, and then linking back to my childhood and seeing the patterns. Like, I remember holding my son, my firstborn son, he's minutes old, and looking at him there in my arms thinking, I'm going to have to cut this child off if he leaves. If he leaves the church, I'm going to have to cut him off. That thought was right there, right from the get-go.
At that most incredible moment.
This continual, you can never pull your child in close and just love them for who they are. You're continually, you talked about breaking the will. And I knew, without being able to put it into words, I knew to successfully live in Gloriavale, you had to have a broken will. Now, I thought it was good to break the will of a child.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. And so I set about systematically, as a father, I set about systematically breaking the will of my children. Right from months old, spanking them if they cried going to sleep.
Yeah.
All that sort of thing. And that all happened to me when I was a kid.
I was going to ask, because you're displaying what you saw happen to you. And did you feel a disconnect between your parents? Was there a lack of attachment? Or so your parents were first generation, so they had a personhood prior to joining the group. You guys never had another sort of personhood that you've been able to fall back on now that you're leaving. So did you feel a disconnection with your parents?
I feel like I was far worse than my parents.
Right.
As a parent. So I believe that first generation did bring an amount of humanity with them when they came into the community. But they were forced to do things that maybe they weren't comfortable with.
Yeah.
And did them to us as children.
Yep.
Not on such a grand scale, but they were forced to do things.
Yep.
But of course, we grew up thinking that's normal, expected, okay. And so all of a sudden, we actually don't even have a conscience about it.
Nope.
So what my parents may have been kind of pushed to do unwillingly with me as a child, I did that willingly and with all my heart to my children.
Believing it's right. Gosh, yeah.
So I would say it's kind of like the second generation of parents actually became the zealots of what was being preached publicly. So even whether our parents actually put things into practice fully or not, we were the zealots that were going to stick loyally to what was taught to further the future of the community and do what was right by our children and bring them up in the community way. And so that was our mindset
Mhm.
in everything we did. So we were taught right from young, this is the best place for you to have your children. We teach the best practices for you to bring up your children. These are the things that are going to bring your children a future.
Mm.
So
So
these were the beliefs
that
that yeah.
you grew up with these very serious fatal beliefs. You talk fatal, hopeful. You're talking about a concept there of death. I mean, is there an exaggeration here? I can hear people in Gloriavale saying, gosh, these people exaggerate. Tell me about this fatal concept.
Fatal. So when we talk about something being fatal, it may not be literal physical death, but it's where your mind begins to start thinking about the consequences of this, and it shuts down because it's just too terrible to even think about. Okay? And that's where I use the word fatal. It's where your mind just doesn't even want to go there as to how big an impact that's going to have. And so as a kid, knowing that, if you stepped out of line or did something wrong, the ramifications that would have on your life, for example, standing up in front of the whole community, being publicly shamed, having your dad say to you he's ashamed of you, over and over again, I'm ashamed of you. And that, a one-off time where a highly respected father might say that to a child might be one thing. But when that is something that you're hearing over and over and over again, it builds that self-image of I am shameful, I am not worthy of love.
Hugely damaging. You talked about the fatal, it might not be physical, and yet there were the physical threats. So tell me, what were your options? Your fatal options did look pretty fatal, actually, didn't it?
I think, too, the concept of fatality was also bound up in the spiritual abuse that was happening.
Yeah.
So, right from young, we were shown films of people burning in hell, preaching fire and brimstone to young children, that literally, if you go and disobey your parents once, you're going to end up burning in hell if Jesus comes back tonight. So it was fatal in the moment by moment thing.
Yes, and you're going to bed at night, and is this having an impact on how well you sleep? Is this having an impact on other things, bedwetting? Is this having any impact?
Yeah. So I had nightmares for about 5 years about going to hell. Before I asked to get baptised. They would come and go a bit depending on what was being preached, but and what films we were watching, I guess. But there was just this very strong pressure on young children, particularly with our generation when we were younger. It did ease off a bit later with our kids. But there's very strong pressure on a daily basis that the sooner we give our lives to Christ, the sooner we can get salvation.
Right.
And so every minute of your life counted on this unforeseen clock. And it was put before you nearly every day that you could be facing God. And so, I mean, as a little child, that concept is just, you can't grasp it in the sense that it is actually true. So it does become this fear-mongering way of controlling what you do.
And I knew the word fear was going to pop up, because that is one of the major mechanisms for keeping people in line. And you talked about feeling a bit better after your baptism. What I find odd about that is Gloriavale doesn't even offer any assurance after you're baptized of being saved and getting to heaven. So, I mean, it's just day by day, leaders they get the power to decide. Ultimately, they can cast you into outer darkness, which is fatal, isn't it? Spiritually fatal. And if you leave Gloriavale, you're cut off like you're dead. So that's fatal. You lose a connection, and then you get pronounced on you're going to die of something or be hit by a car crash or a lightning strike. And they're laughing because they're going to tell us a lightning strike story.
8 weeks after we left, our house got struck by lightning, burnt to the ground, and
Oh yeah.
the thoughts are there straight away, This is God telling us we've gone the wrong way,
And those thoughts came to you, and they were with me in 2 seconds flat. Oh no, I just know what you're going to be saying to yourselves, and I know what people at Gloriavale are going to be saying.
Yeah.
How terrible, how disgusting, revolting.
I had with the fear of going to hell. From about 6 years old through to after I was baptised, so 12, 13, I had a fear of being anywhere where I couldn't see someone else.
Yeah.
So if ever I was in a situation where I couldn't see someone else, I would just be terrified. Or even if I could see some of my friends, I still felt terrified because I didn't know whether my friends were going to heaven or not.
Were you worried they'd been raptured and you'd been left
the
behind?
rapture. The Lord's come back and everyone's gone.
Left
and
behind.
I remember sometimes I was over on the farm on the other side of the river and was there for 3 or 4 hours completely by myself, and I would be panicking because you're terrified all the time. It's just fear driven. You're completely fear driven.
And so what does that look like in terms of, I know we brought up before, bedwetting at Gloriavale. I remember in the Royal Commission reading some of their responses, Gloriavale's response to the Royal Commission. They tried to make out that their bedwetting has got really bad in the last couple of years because of all the intense media scrutiny and their children, being impacted by it. But that's not what I've heard.
So I wet my bed up until I was about 10. And my parents were quite humane about the way they handled our family.
Right.
I know there were a lot of parents that were not at all. But just a lot of it was those fears, the nightmares, the not sleeping properly, not getting enough sleep. Being really, I know for me, it was often triggered by a room shift, sudden room shifts. You had no forewarning. Your every, and it's something we've discussed just recently with our kids, is that every decision that gets made that affects you right from a little tiny child, not even your parents had a say over those decisions.
Right. So you're moving room.
Yeah, they couldn't even prep us for things that were happening in our lives. So your whole life, you're just at the whim and mercy of whoever's in charge. And we've just recently, with our children, just this last week actually, had some really, upset, emotional children because we, came and said, so kids, we're changing this thing, right? And they just went nuts, just really bad behaviour, and it's like, whoa, what's going on?
Yeah.
And we finally got them talking, and what came out is they were saying that they talked about how the leaving Gloriavale and how it just messed up their whole life. And every time they come to a change, they're worried that their whole life's going to be in turmoil again. And see, we left as adults, right? We knew why we were leaving. We knew there was going to be mess, but we couldn't get that across to our children, And so children leave, even the leaving process for children, in some ways, there's complications that adults don't have.
Yes, and so you would like to see that there were no issues. Gloriavale hadn't set people up so that level of change is so catastrophic and so fatal, because they lose connection with everyone in there when they go. Kids can cope with moving towns, but it's the connection, and for them it's kind of that fatal side of it.
I think decision making is a massive lack.
It is.
As a child, you just never.
Yeah.
There's nothing you get to decide.
Yeah,
You never get choices, and so you never get opportunities to practice decision making. And I know, I mean, for myself, I still struggle hugely with decision making.
Yeah, massive. It's a very common feature.
Bad word comes into it all the time. I'm going to make a bad decision. Bad decision. Bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just back to the bedwetting one. As a teacher, like I was teaching for 17 years. I was in the school for 17 years. And there was never a year that there weren't children coming to school late because they were taking their wet beds up. It wasn't just the last 2 years. It's been happening for years. And yes, the more children that we had, the bigger grades that we had, we didn't just have 1 or 2. Now we had 5 kids late because they were carrying up. But then the thing that really sticks in my mind about that is that I would go out looking for children who were late for school in the last 3 years I was teaching. And I would find little 5-year-old boys hiding behind something with their wet bed crying. And I'd say, "Hi, why aren't you at school?" "Mummy said I have to take this wet bed up, but I'm too scared." Why? Because they have to walk past every single person they know in the community. And what happens? All the adults they walk past just say, "Oh, you wet your bed. You're a naughty boy." And so getting this from one adult is enough without getting it from 50 every time.
Yeah, that's a devastating.
It is. And the damage I received when I was young, I started stuttering when I was not long after my dad died, but we were living in a house with 5 other families, and all the adults in the house, every time they talked to me, would try and fix my stuttering and tell me, "No, don't you talk until you know what you're going to say." And so I just developed this thing, okay, I can't talk to adults, I'm never talking to adults again. And so
your hiding begins really young.
It's right.
Yeah. So you've got a world. You've got your own little. So do you develop as a child in a group like Gloriavale your own internal world? What does that look like?
I don't even know if you build an internal world. You actually just build a I don't know. All I can think of is this picture of a really scared creature that's always just darting and looking around and can never relax and focus and breathe.
Hypervigilant.
I could not sleep at night as a child. I don't remember sleeping at night. I remember laying awake every night looking at pictures on the roof because there were lights from the rooms over the wall. I was just awake. Yeah. That's what I remember my nights being, awake.
Yeah, and so you and you don't have to talk in detail about this, but there were other traumas that so you've got the backdrop of a father dying, a vulnerability that comes with that inside Gloriavale, lack of protection. There are, as we know, predators. There's been unhealthy behaviours, unhealthy thinking patterns, all sorts of problems around that. And so you've got this added part of your life that's just adding to trauma and sleep difficulties. Would that be?
Yeah. Oh, there is definitely that. And then having those sort of types of abuse happen to you as a child and not having anyone safe to talk about it means you literally carry the burden with you wherever you go. And so when an adult does growl at you and say you're bad about this one little thing, the thought that went through my head every time, oh, you don't know about all this that has happened to me,
Wow.
so I must be way more bad than what you're telling me I am.
Yeah. So so the silencing begins young. Your own silencing begins, so you've got this general community silencing, you've got family silencing, you've got internal silencing, devastating impact on a child. Did you have any sense, hopeful, that there were, that sort of some of your emotional needs weren't being met, or that there were other safety concerns for yourself that were leading to, or was it mainly just the fear?
Well, I just thinking of like basic needs as a child. I grew up feeling like it was bad, wrong of me to ask for food if I was hungry. Getting a bit older, sort of more into the 10 to 15-year-old bracket, if I ever felt tired, it was like, no, I shouldn't be tired. I should be working. I should be fine.
Yeah.
I don't, and so you learn to actually shut down your own needs.
Yeah.
You shut down your own needs. And even to this day, I still struggle to actually just say, well, hey, actually, I'm really had it. I need to have a break. There's something in me that says, no, that's lazy. That's selfish. I should be caring for others, not worrying about myself. So yeah, that shutting down of genuine needs is really strong. Really
Incredible.
strong.
You talk about hunger. Did you ever steal the apples, Hopeful?
I was a chronic thief. That plays into that whole what I said before about I didn't want to be bad, so I just created this completely false perception of myself. So I felt it was bad to ask for food, so I wouldn't ask my mother, but I was genuinely hungry, so I stopped.
Isn't that incredible?
In my mind, I justified stealing was not as bad as asking for food. Work that out if you can. I don't know. It's really twisted.
You obviously stole knowing that if you got in trouble for the stealing, it was fatal, because other boys got in trouble for stealing, got stood on the stage. So, So you're really
different personalities, different people. I got smart, so I knew when to steal and when not to steal. I was smart and I was intent on being seen as good. So I got really good at being deceived.
Yeah.
And that's incredible.
I actually remember conversations amongst my friends growing up when a child got found out for stealing. I remember conversations happening amongst us. Oh, they're just really dumb thieves. We know how to do it better. So these sort of conversations happened. So you did actually develop stealing as a survival kit. It was literally essential to your survival. For example, I did ask for food and I got told, no, you're not hungry. You don't know what it's like to be hungry. We were starving when we were kids and you eat way more than we eat. So I literally did not even develop any awareness to my physical needs. It wasn't until I was pregnant with my sixth baby that I started realizing what it meant, what actually hungry feels like. And it was just this mind-blowing thing to me. Oh, is this feeling I'm feeling hungry? Well, I've been feeling this for 3 hours,
I've heard you talk about that. You spoke about not being able to identify, like you recognized you felt something as a child or as an adult, but you couldn't actually put a finger on it or name it or pull it apart from, was it an emotional feeling or was it a physical feeling or was it hunger?
I think it's more than just neglect. It's actually purposeful neglect. You're taught to neglect your feelings because if you feel anything, you're wrong. So you learn, because we taught that no, you're not hungry, you're not this, you're just being naughty, you're just being this, you're just being that. And you're always dealt with on the spiritual level. And so you never learn what your physical needs even are. So not only have parents neglected their children, they've purposely neglected them by saying, no, that's not a physical need, that's a spiritual problem.
Oh, yes. That's devastating too. And wow, Erica Bourneman from Mission of Malice, I mean, unbelievable. Let me just read this to you. She said, my relationship with food is still completely messed up. I don't know when I'm hungry and I don't know when I'm not. And I read that and thought, well, Victory, I've heard your explanations of that before, and it's always just struck me as incredible you're able to articulate it now, but I mean, it's so foreign. What do you mean you didn't know? And that says to me the power of the conditioning that goes on as a young person. That's how powerful it is, that people can't figure out when they're hungry. I just
it gets even worse for the women, because, well, particularly when the founder was still alive, because he would talk publicly a lot about overweight. And so I remember, I would have been about 8 or 9, being told by my older sisters that, you know, I was too fat. I mean, I wasn't even fat, but, you know, if you've got a certain shaped body, you're not going to be pleasing to your husband, or, you know, and this sort of thing. So you grow up with paranoia about being overweight. And so then you starve yourself for days thinking that this is going to solve your problem. And then if you eat something, you feel so guilty. And so your life isn't even about eating when I'm hungry so I've got energy. Your life is completely about your external, what people see of you. And if someone sees me eating and I'm slightly overweight, they're going to think I'm fat because I'm eating.
The judgment,
so they think I'm greedy because I'm eating. So eating was kind of more like linked to greed and selfishness rather than to hunger.
Meeting a need. It's absolutely it's incredible to take just one tiny little thing like that and then to see how a bad belief or a doctrinal belief really impacts something like eating. And we're clearly going to have to do an episode on it. And I think we have a lot more to talk about in regards to children. So are you happy to continue with us on for, let's say, a part 2? Let's say now we'll wrap up part 1 of this incredible episode, because we're still only touching the edges of some of the issues around childhood. And how about we invite you back for our part 2 in a couple of moments, and we'll continue this discussion. You happy with that idea? Brilliant. And I'll just say thanks to our listeners for listening in and tuning in. I'm sure you're sitting on the edge of your seat. It's always incredible to hear people who have left high demand groups who can articulate what's happened to them. And so make sure you join us for the next part of the episode, and we'll catch you back here as soon as you're able.
If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.